I've been trying to get into the Trails series for a long time, and it's not that I've had trouble doing so because of any fault in the games themselves, but as a person who only owns the Nintendo Switch and a MacBook Pro, the series has not exactly been very accessible to me. It all started when I got Trails of Cold Steel 3 on the Switch because I was really craving the kind of JRPG that it appeared to be, and so I tried it, but there was just something missing. I'd read summaries of the past games and I'd watched Let's Plays, but I couldn't really connect to the characters or to the world or really what was happening at all. I felt like I was playing the epilogue and not experiencing the actual story. So I took a break from it, and when Trails from Zero came out on Switch, I got that because everyone said it was a much better entry point to the series. And it was, but I still had this urge to return to the beginning. Because even in Trails from Zero, the story already felt so far along on its track. So I finally managed to get Trails in the Sky FC up and running on my Mac using the GOG Store and the Porting Kit app, which, by the way, work absolutely beautifully on my MacBook Pro. This being done, I started the game and buckled up for a long ride. Now that I've finally finished the first game in the series, I can say I'm very glad I did eventually go back to the beginning, because this first installment does a wonderful job of setting everything up, and it absolutely hooked me. The charm of FC is the low-stakes, rustic quality of the story in this first installment. You play as Estelle, who has just become a junior bracer, and you run around performing more or less trivial tasks in various towns while somehow, almost accidentally, getting yourself tangled up in the political affairs of kingdoms, republics, and empires. I love this approach to bringing the player into the story because it makes the player feel very small, and the world very massive. Estelle, as a character, is basically insignificant, in the way that she gets pulled into the events of the story feel realistic. The other reason this approach works is because despite there being so much going on, the real meat of the story is all happening under the surface. You get the sense that things are developing, but the immediate concern of the narrative is always very human. For example, much of the game draws on the mystery of a character's disappearance. It'd be too soon and too sudden to ask the player to care about the politics of various nations we know nothing about. But we can definitely get on board with caring about finding a character we've bonded with. And so the story gets tied into their disappearance almost as a side note until it usurps center stage. This happens in every area you visit, in fact. The people and their lives are what matters, and the main story takes a backseat to the investigations of, say, a burnt-down orphanage or a corrupt mayor, until the player knows a great deal about how this world works without ever feeling overwhelmed by it. This is very, very different from my experience playing Cold Steel 3 or Trails from Zero, and it's because a lot of the work of developing the world and characters had already been done in this game. The series is sort of expecting you to follow along from the start. Now, I don't see this as a downside at all because it's exactly like reading a fantasy series from a book. If we started Harry Potter at the Goblet of Fire, no doubt we'd feel a bit confused and overwhelmed, and it would be our fault. The only reason it's a problem is because the first installments aren't as accessible as books are. But if you can start from the beginning, then do so, because this is a story to be appreciated in order. It's not like Final Fantasy where every game stands on its own, and that's what makes it so special. Not to make a bad pun, but Trails in the Sky is playing the long game in a way that few or perhaps no other game developers have the patience to do. Because the story is so good, I won't go into any detail here. I'll only say that I was hooked by the end of it, and it left me needing to start Trails' second chapter immediately. So the story is good, but how about the gameplay? There are two gameplay elements that define the experience of Trails FC, which are exploration and combat. The exploration aspect occurs in cities, trails, and dungeons, and provides the players with opportunities to interact with characters, find objects, and observe the world. Although the dungeon design leaves something to be desired, and a lot of the trails between towns are like hallways, There is an extreme level of care and detail in the design of the world, especially the towns, cities, and buildings. The cities and houses are a pleasure to run around in, and they make the world feel very real. I particularly love the architecture and the floor plan of houses, and how they make sense. They feel like real buildings. For example, in the weapons shop in Gransel, there are back rooms to peek around in, where the weapons seller stores his merchandise, and it makes the shop feel like an actual place. There's no reason that back room even needs to be there. It's not important for the story, it's simply there to make it feel like a real shop. Same thing with the houses of NPCs. If you talk to some of them, you may realize this NPC is a merchant, and the objects in his house speak to this character trait. Also, the basement of Gransel Castle has a sort of food storage in the basement, which again, I think adds to the realism of the castle as a living, breathing place. There are also maids' quarters where you can see them cooking, sleeping, or enjoying their off time. And the whole effect of this is a feeling of comprehensiveness. It's a world that feels like people actually live in it. It's functional, operational, and that's part of the joy of exploring it. The exploration also ties in with the side quests, which aren't exactly side quests in a typical sense, because most of them tie in very well with either the world building or some kind of character development. The quests that are a bit more general are easily done on the way to other things, so it's easy to complete everything without the sense of being overwhelmed, as typically happens to me when I play games with a lot of side quests. The incorporation of these quests does a wonderful job of lending a sense of freedom to an otherwise very linear JRPG experience. The other aspect is, of course, the combat, which I would describe as complex, but not complicated. The orbment system is like a more developed version of materia, and it's a lot of fun to upgrade the quartz and see what kind of arts you get by combining them. I also love the fact that weapons have area effects. Estelle, who has a staff, can attack by swinging or jabbing ahead in a straight line, or she can simply whack a nearby enemy over the head. The kind of attack you use will determine how many enemies you hit. This adds a lot of depth to the combat system and gives the player a lot of agency. There's also a tactical element involved because the characters can move around and position themselves to have a better advantage. Because of this, a battle can play out very differently depending on how you choose to approach it. There were times when enemies just obliterated me, but if I restarted the battle with a different tactic, I could wipe them out before they even had a chance to get going. The graphics, most people will say, are nothing to write home about. On the contrary, I find them very charming. The aerial view combined with the chibi style has all of the charm of pixel art, with the added bonus of increased graphical detail. The character models are compact and yet intricately designed. You'll notice an incredible amount of detail in the characters' costumes, and it reflects their personalities, their social backgrounds, etc. Character portraits are expressive. Numerous characters have portraits and even a variety of facial expressions, bringing the interactions and personalities to life. I think without these portraits, the game would lose a lot of its vitality because so much of the pleasure of playing it comes from getting invested in the conversations. It's one of those small but crucial details that elevate the game. So many of the reviews of this game preface their recommendations by saying something like, it's a slow burn, but... However, I think the player is missing out on something if they're feeling eager to reach the high drama of the later game, because the slow burn aspect is the feature, not a bug. You have to be able to enjoy the slow burn, not mash X to get past it. Everything rests on the slow development because the eventual payoff is incredibly satisfying after waiting so long to watch it come around. The slow burn also reminds me of a favorite genre manga of mine, the slice of life manga. And if you see this game as a vast military epic told through slice of life sections, then you'll have the right attitude you need to enjoy it. You may be asked to do mundane things like get boarding tickets, check into your flight, and find your seats. Or you may go to a nice hotel and look at the rooms. It's about the joy of being with characters you like and going places with them. I like to take advantage of these moments of slow pace to do things like read an in-game newspaper or a book. The point is, there is a sense of realism to the travel that is nothing quite like any other game I've ever played. To me, Trails FC is a definitive example of what a JRPG can and ought to be. I've already moved on to Trails SC and plan to make more Trails content on this channel as I get deeper into the series. If you're interested in this kind of content, please like this video and subscribe. Thanks for watching.